Hi. Sometimes people ask me, I've got this mutual fund. It sounds like a really cool investment. Should I invest in it? As an advisor, I don't look at a single fund and say whether or not I think that's a good investment. I think about it in terms of a total portfolio that a client is invested in, and I want to know whether or not that fund fits into a place in their portfolio that will provide them with diversification. Today I want to explain what diversification is, what it looks like, and one way to achieve it through using tools provided by Morningstar.com. As an investor, diversification means not buying just one or two investments, but instead buying many different investments and different types of investments, so that if things don't go the way we expect, we don't lose everything on a bad investment. There are different ways to achieve diversification in a portfolio. You can buy U.S. companies or foreign companies, large and small, value versus growth, or in terms of are you buying stocks, which is ownership of companies, versus bonds, meaning loans. If you go to the website Morningstar.com, you can see how they analyze what the market is doing. They base it on this criteria of how big are the companies and whether they are value or growth, and they create this tic-tac-toe chart where you can see the difference between growth, value, large, and small. I showed on the given date where I took these images, you can see on the left side the market was down that day, and on the right side you can see that as of that day these different parts of the market have had positive returns over 3 years. Large versus small is fairly easy to explain when describing a company. Morningstar thinks of large cap companies as the top 70% of companies in the market in terms of the company size. Small cap is the bottom 10%. So mid caps are the amounts in between. As such, most of the market is in large cap companies. The amounts of those, the dollar value changes based on what country you're talking about. Here in the US, large cap companies are generally around $10 billion in value or greater. The difference between value and growth stocks is a bit more complicated, and Morningstar looks to different factors in a stock's characteristics to determine whether or not it's growth or value or somewhere in between. So things that they look at are price over earnings, book value, cash flow, and the growth of earnings of the company. A company that tends to have faster growth but a higher stock price is generally in the growth category, whereas a company where the stock price is relatively low compared to their earnings is going to be considered value. One thing that you'll note about a lot of value stocks is they're more likely to pay dividends, and they tend to be represented by sectors of the economy that are maybe a little more old-fashioned or traditional. Think energy production, utilities, banks, and consumer staples, things that we eat and drink and use every day, like toothpaste. Growth stocks, on the other hand, are more often going to be up-and-coming companies that are doing new things with technology or patents. If we click on the large cap value box on Morningstar.com and then click portfolio, we can scroll down and see some of the biggest companies that Morningstar categories as large cap value. I'm looking at it right now and I see the top 5 are Berkshire Hathaway, Meta, ExxonMobil, Johnson & Johnson, and JP Morgan. Growth companies, on the other hand, are usually higher in price relative to their earnings because the expectation is that in future years, earnings are going to grow quickly enough to justify this higher stock price that they're paying. On Morningstar.com, if we click on large cap growth and go to the portfolio page, we can scroll down and here are the top 5 holdings there. It's Apple, Microsoft, NVIDIA, Alphabet, Eli Lilly. It's these companies that are creating new patents, usually at a more rapid pace. They're growing their earnings, and right now, a lot of these are technology companies. As investors building our portfolio, we want exposure to all different types of the market because we don't know where the market's going. So we definitely want large cap value and growth. We also want some mid and small sized companies as well, because sometimes those are going to be the sectors of the economy that outperform. So when we get a question like, is this fund something I should invest in? First, we want to look at the fund itself, see where it fits, and see if that fills a part of our portfolio that has a gap in it or an insufficient number of investments. If we look at the portfolio page for a mutual fund on Morningstar.com, we can get an idea of what types of investments they are picking up. So here is a mutual fund. I'm leaving the name off. What I can see immediately on the left side here is that this is predominantly invested in U.S. stocks. It says 88% in U.S. equities, a little over 8% in non-U.S. And then there's also some cash here. If we look at the stock style on the right side of the page, we see that tic-tac-toe chart showing large, medium, small, value, blend, and growth. The blue circle represents where most of their holdings are. And the little dot in the center pinpoints the center of all that, where this tells us that this mutual fund, even though it has a good amount of different types of investments, the core of it is in the large cap blend space. If we look at this part of the portfolio page, we see the breakdown of this fund by the sectors of the economy that they're invested in. And as you can see, they're invested in all these different types of sectors. One of the ways they do it, and you can see this on the left side, is they show where this portfolio is in the blue bar. And then they have a little black line to indicate where the average of a similar investment fund would be. So we can see that here, communication services, we are very low in this particular fund relative to the benchmark or what's normal. Whereas if we look at consumer defensive stocks, we're higher than the average. On the right side, they have other measurements of what types of companies are invested in here. And there's a lot of data here. Let me just focus on what Morningstar means by wide moat, no moat, or narrow moat. The Morningstar thinks of companies with a wide moat as being like a castle with a moat that goes around it that's hard for invaders to get across. Similarly, these are companies where it's hard for one of their competitors to infiltrate their market. For example, if you've got a technology that is hard for other people to mimic, but lots of people want, that's a wide moat firm, because let's say it's a great phone, a great smartphone, or a biotechnology that treats a disease that other companies can't treat, then it's hard for competitors to get at your revenue. A no-moat company is a little bit riskier because it has a product that lots of people can imitate. If we scroll down further on the page, we can see some other data. In the upper left here, the equity holdings, there are 103 stocks in this portfolio. And we can see below that the percentages in each of those stocks as of the last update. So we see that a little over 5% is in Microsoft, 4% Apple, 2 and change in United Health Group, Visa, Accenture, and Thermo Fisher, and so on. And we can scroll through the pages and see what all these are. But as you can see, it's a mix of different types of companies. All of these, though, are names that, if you haven't heard, it's likely that you've at least heard of some of them. This is going to be different than if we look at a small cap mutual fund. Here's another mutual fund, this is a small cap value, and I can tell that by looking on the right side there. We see that that dot is right in the middle of the small cap value box. So the types of investments here are going to be very different, and you're not likely to recognize all of the names. You might pick up one or two, but most of us aren't going to be familiar with all of them. Here we see that there are 99 equity holdings. You see that in the upper left. And then beneath it are the list of these companies. Their biggest holding is Graphic Packaging Holding Company, followed by First Citizens Bank Shares and Old National Bancorp. And if you look to the far right on the page, we see the sector of each of these stocks. You notice that a lot of them are in the financial services. That's because this is a value fund, and financial services tends to be a sector that is priced like value stocks. So to answer the question in the end, whether or not your portfolio needs the fund that you're interested in, you first have to understand what your overall portfolio allocation should be. So if there is a gap somewhere, you can use that fund to fill it in. If you don't have a gap, maybe you want to replace something, but you don't want to overweight it too much, because if the winds of the market turn against you and that fund or that sector of the economy does poorly, you're going to be hurting. So that's why we need to make sure we're diversified. Lastly, I like to finish every video with something, a piece of classical music that will make your life a bit richer in a different way. This week, I want to recommend the Overture to Rienzi by Richard Wagner. Wagner is known as the master of melody. I think you'll like this one. It's a little bit longer than some of my previous recommendations. I hope you enjoy it. Have a great week.